Baker Botts, LLP, provides podcasts for educational purposes only. They are not legal advice and are not intended to establish an attorney client relationship. This communication may constitute attorney advertising.
Welcome to AI Council Code. The AI Council Code is here to keep you up to date on all AI legal issues arising in the modern business frontier. I'm your host, Maggie Welsh, and today we're joined by Sterling Marchand, a partner in our DC office of Baker Botts. Sterling is also the host of Baker Botts' Lawful Influence podcast, where he covers legal issues in the world of campaign finance and lobbying. Sterling recently recorded a podcast called RoboCop, the FCC cracks down on AI in political ads, where he discusses a recent announcement from the FCC that would seek a rule to limit AI in political ads. So he's joined us today to discuss the latest developments of that announcement and the use of AI in political campaigns. Welcome, Sterling. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners to give them a background of your experiences?
Yeah, so I'm a litigation partner in our DC office. I handle a variety of litigation, commercial litigation, white collar litigation. And in addition to that, I counsel clients on corporate, political, and election law. And it includes providing advice on compliance with campaign finance rules, the establishment of political action committees, lobbying disclosure requirements, ethics requirements, really anything dealing with political and election law from a corporate perspective, I can provide guidance and advice on.
And so today we're going to talk about the FCC and AI in political campaigns. So before we do that, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about AI being used in political campaigns. And I know it can be used for good and then also has some risks associated with it. So let's talk through that and talk through some of the good ways that AI can be used in political campaigns.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because so often when we talk about AI right now, we are focused on the risks of disinformation or presenting something that didn't actually occur. And we forget that there are a lot of valid reasons that political campaigns in particular would want to use AI in crafting messaging. And there's sort of three buckets that I consider when I'm thinking about the good that AI can be used for in political ads. And the first is accessibility. Advertising or political advertising, you're trying to reach a target audience of potential voters, and AI allows you to take what may be generated in, for example, English and turn it into a Spanish speaking ad or another language to be able to hit a target audience and to make the advertisement still look fluid. So it's not dubbed, and to have it look more natural. So it can increase accessibility to your target audience. The second advantage is price. We talk a lot about the dangers of money in politics generally and just how much money there is in politics and millions of dollars being spent in campaigns. Part of that is because campaigning is a very expensive endeavor. It costs a lot of money to generate content and then to advertise that. So with AI tools, some of which are just freely available to the public, being able to generate advertising, videos, images that used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce per ad, AI reduces that price point. So for campaigns that may have lower resources, it allows them to compete and to flatten the playing field a little bit. And so there's advantage there. And then the last bucket is really the versatility in AI, and that really goes to being able to target voters. There is just a ton of data in politics. We collect information about all potential voters and demographics, and AI would allow a campaign or any entity looking to issue a political ad to be able to take that data and to leverage it. So you could put a prompt in that says, create an advertisement for voters that are concerned about education of young children, or create an ad where the candidate is shaking hands with firefighters or school teachers or police officers, and then be able to have all of these different advertisements, especially online, to be able to target those particular audiences so that the potential voters are receiving a message that is going to resonate best with them. So those are all examples of how a campaign may want to use AI in a very legitimate way.
Thank you for walking through those uses of AI that I could see a lot of campaigns finding really useful. And like you talked about, to have accessibility and to reach more of a target audience. And I think that's where a lot of people outside of even political campaigns are seeing the use of AI and using AI in advertisements and the like. But let's talk about the risks, because I think it is hard to ignore the headlines of some of the risks and some of the incidences that have happened with AI in political campaigns and how it has been used in not so great ways. So, what are some of the risks with respect to using AI in political campaigns?
Yeah, so I think the area we hear about most is misinformation or false information that is being presented. And to be honest, disinformation in politics has been around probably as long as politics itself. So there's nothing new in terms of candidates or campaigns fudging the truth, to put it delicately, right, in terms of advancing their political careers. But I think what the difference with AI is that it can be used to create such realistic imagery, video, or audio that it becomes nearly impossible for the listeners or the viewers to be able to really discern in that moment whether or not something is true or not. We saw this earlier this year in New Hampshire, right before the primary in February. A bad actor used AI generated robocalls imitating the voice of President Biden and blasted out phone calls to a number of potential voters using President Biden's voice to say, save your vote. Don't vote in the primary, save your vote for November, suggesting that you only get to vote once. Now, we don't know whether it actually had the impact it intended to, which was to keep primary voters at home, but that was certainly the intent. So there's just an increased risk that misinformation is going to be spread through AI-generated content. So that's a big bucket of risk. And the other is just the lack of transparency. The name of the game in politics, and especially political advertising, is disclosure. And we give a lot of leeway to be able to promote a candidate or to raise money, but then we're going to disclose who donates and how much and what they spend it on. And that's all available through the Federal Election Commission. When it comes to AI, I think there's a view that we should just be transparent and disclose that that is what is being used. So if you're presenting an image, whether it's a candidate kissing a baby or shaking hands with a firefighter, if that didn't really happen, if that's not a real image, then we should just be transparent and disclose that it was an AI generated image. And that goes doubly so if it is being used to portray perhaps your opponent in a negative light. So those are really the two areas. I think misinformation generally, just making it more prolific, and then the lack of transparency sort of eroding that public trust in the political process.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, transparency is a big topic in AI and allowing people to really know when AI is being used to generate whatever it might be, a marketing ad or a political ad, a robocall, even like you said. And I think that will help because then it is allowing users to understand what they are consuming. So the FCC has proposed rules to work on these issues and address some of the risks associated with using AI in political campaigns. So why don't you talk us through what the FCC's activity is right now?
Yeah, so a couple months ago in late May, the FCC chairwoman put out a press release basically saying that she had developed a proposed rulemaking that she had circulated with her colleagues that would require disclosure anytime AI generated content is used in political ads on radio or television. And radio and television is sort of the domain that the Federal Communications Commission regulates. And so it's limited to that. But the idea behind it would be that anytime a political advertisement runs over radio or television, it would have to include an explicit disclosure, an on-air disclosure, if AI generated content was being used, regardless of the purpose or even how extensive the use of the AI content was. And that would apply, I should note, actually to not only candidates. We often think about it in terms of candidates, but for listeners who have corporate PACs, for example, or engage with issue PACs, the same would apply to them. So even if they were just putting out an advertisement to solicit money to support, say, an energy PAC, the rule would also apply to them. So that was the first proposal. And that was really in direct response to that New Hampshire robocall that I was talking about earlier. And that's really at the very early stage. The public has actually not seen that notice of proposed rulemaking. And so right now, the chairwoman is really just trying to get internal feedback from her colleagues. Would they support it? What changes would they make before taking any additional steps? But I think part of the reason that she took that initial step was AI is being talked about very actively right now as we were in the midst of the 2024 election. And certainly as we get closer to November, I expect we'll see more and more instances of AI content. And so the FCC wants to say, we're being proactive. We're looking at this and we're considering ways to address it. So that was the first rule that they came out with or started discussing a few months ago. And then even more recently, the FCC proposed another rule that's not unique to political ads, but covers AI-generated robocalls.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about that recent rule and how that's different from the previous rule?
Yeah, so the most recent rule targeting AI-generated robocalls applies to all robocalls, all telecommunications, regardless of whether it's political content or just a regular advertising commercial robocall. The interesting thing about this is the FCC has actually developed the notice of proposed rulemaking. It's about 26 pages, and they will be voting on it in August as to whether or not to move forward with it as a formal rulemaking. It includes a definition of AI-generated phone calls that basically includes any call that uses any technology or tool to artificially generate a voice. It proposes requiring clear and conspicuous disclosures anytime that AI content is used in a telephone call. And it also seeks comment on developing technologies that can detect in real time whether a particular phone call has AI-generated content. It also has a carve out for technology that is used to support an individual with a speech or hearing disability, because there is technology on the market that allows users to take text or keyboard inputs and turn it into an artificially spoken voice so that they can communicate in spite of speech or hearing disabilities. So it'll be interesting to see the discussion on this new rule over AI robocalls that the FCC engages in August and to see where this goes. But I think the clear indication is that the FCC now, in the matter of 2 months, has put forth regulations, proposed regulations at least, governing AI in different types of communications, that we're going to see some more regulation in this space.
And this regulation or proposed regulation that the FCC is working on, what sort of impact would that have on elections and political campaigns and ads that are used in political campaigns? Will these proposed regulations make a difference?
That's the million-dollar question. I think the short answer is good actors are going to disclose and have no problem complying with the laws. Bad actors will just break the law and do it regardless. I think the bigger danger here, as we talked about earlier, the FCC is only part of the equation. They can only regulate radio, television, phone calls. Most of us, I think it's safe to say, are receiving advertising online through social media, through these other avenues. And so when it comes to political content, the Federal Election Commission can regulate political content across all of the spectrums, but they have been much slower to act. And they have somewhat counterproductively been focused on prohibiting the use of AI in certain types of political communications, as opposed to the FCC's approach, which is to require transparency and disclosure. So my fear is that the FCC will advance the ball and will come out with disclosure rules, but it will only apply to radio, television, and telephone calls, and will create this expectation in the public that AI-generated content will have disclosures. And then on the online social media side, where there is no requirement, nothing will have disclosures, and the assumption will always be that it doesn't have AI-generated content as a result. So we really need the government to come together on this and figure out a way forward so that all of the avenues of media are covered simultaneously. Otherwise, you have this weird stair step where you're creating false expectations in the public.
Interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about that, but the false expectations, I could see a lot of areas for additional risks and concerns there as well. Thank you, Sterling, for being with us today and sharing your thoughts. Any final thoughts that you have for our listeners?
I just hope that as these rules go forward at the FCC or the FEC, that the users of AI, the good users of AI, will speak up and remind the government that there is a lot of beneficial uses of AI in political ads and other types of advertising, and that any rule that comes out, including something as simple as disclosure and transparency, weighs those risks and doesn't overstep and create this chilling effect that takes away from the ability of users to use AI generated content.
Thank you, Sterling, and thank you for sharing your insights. And I know that this is a topic that I'm sure you'll be covering on your podcast, Lawful Influence, and that we hope to have you back on AI Council Code to talk about these issues again. And thank you to our listeners of AI Council Code. We are so glad that you joined us today. Stay tuned for additional podcasts and more insights on AI legal issues from BakerBots.
Thank you for listening to this BakerBots podcast. BakerBots has the experience, knowledge, and people to address our clients' most significant legal issues. For more information on BakerBots practices, please visit us at bakerbots.com. This presentation is provided by BakerBots LLP for educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship. Under the rules of certain jurisdictions, this communication may constitute attorney advertising.